Tale of Fenril. The fall of 2010 brought a surge in green power usage amongst my wider range of classmates, as it tended to at my school during one's junior year. Green power up until that point had been an activity exclusively for the green power users, such as myself, Leaf, Tree Demon, River, Rufflesack, Teton, and another group of users who are better described as generic power users, since their usage of green power seemed to be lost in a torrent of more detrimental power usage. Regardless, it had been an activity reserved for our cliques, while the greater sphere of jocks, academics and gamer types were not interested, and were instead worried about their reputations and the unknown repercussions of dwelling in the great unknown. In a lot of ways, I couldn't blame them. There was more than enough negative propaganda surrounding the then illicit green power, let alone the adolescent use of green power. But my self-righteous view at the time was that my personal success in academia and athletics, despite my green power usage, should have been enough for everyone else in my grade to understand that it was worth at least a try. I thought that I could have been the one in our grade to turn everyone onto it with my unique status in the green power community, but ever since I had started my green power usage back in the 8th grade, I had been relegated into some degenerate social category and had fallen out of the public favour before they even gave me a chance. Then that first surge of new green power users arrived, largely because of my classmate Fenril's introduction to the stuff, thanks to me and River. Fenril was someone River and I had known since we were little kids. He was a nerd in virtue of his supreme Star Wars fandom, not to mention his prowess as a history and politics buff. Don't get me wrong, I love Star Wars probably more than the next guy, and have a somewhat encyclopedic knowledge of it, but I left a lot of those interests behind once I reached a certain age. Not that I look down on people who keep such interests up into adolescence and beyond. Sometimes I return to Star Wars content and cartoons from my youth for the sheer sentimentality of it all. I guess to draw a comparison, I was known as a soccer player and psychedelic power user in our school, whereas Fenril was better known for loving Star Wars, and especially the allegorical politics of it. I think that's what was most nerdy about his interest for me, the fact that he paid close attention to the politically driven conversational aspects of the series, while most marvel at the Force and the lightsabers. It's not super important, but it's best to understand Fenril as a guy with such proclivities. He was a hilarious guy though, and he remained engaged in school basketball for a while. In this way, he was actually a lot like me and River. He was interested in a variety of things, not necessarily erring towards one side more than any other. When junior year came around, he couldn't ignore the fact that River and I had been consuming green power like mad men for the past year, and he was finally curious enough to want to give it a shot. His first self-ascribed step was simply to be around us while we consumed green power, just to get a feel for how it was. So River and I went to his house one day after school and hung out on his porch where we broke out our green power vessel. He watched us consume and was noticeably fascinated, but he ultimately concluded that he didn't want to be someone who consumed it. It just wasn't for him. We were okay with that, though a little disappointed, since we wanted another friend to join our crew. Fenril was quirky, intelligent, and a great conversationalist. Why wouldn't we want him to join us on weekend nights as we consumed green power into the wee hours and explored novel thoughts? A week or so went by, and Fenril couldn't contain his curiosity. He said that he actually did want to give the green power a shot. He figured he didn't have much to lose, and after he witnessed us casually consume the stuff, it was clear to him that there weren't any glaring issues with it. So, we drove off with him in River's car after school and went to a woodland area for his first consumption. We had planned on hanging out with another fellow that afternoon, Meister Daniel. I give him the title Meister because he was the first person in our class to try the green power. Meister Daniel was in the 6th grade the first time he consumed, but his status as a chubby outcast type rendered him as someone no one paid much attention to. We were all 12 at the time, and just thought that he was a weird dude, unaware of the possibility that he could be an illicit green power user. Anyway, I had recently made friends with Meister Daniel through the green power, and was amazed at how young he had started. He hadn't done well in school, but he clearly was a wise man, nonetheless, who the green power had been working on for some time. So we joined forces with him for the afternoon, and he was honoured to be a part of Fenril's first green power consumption. We showed Fenril how it was done again, and he successfully consumed a moderate amount of green power. As I may have mentioned, a lot of people don't feel the green power experience upon first consumption, but Fenril was not one of those people. His eyes grew red and squinted, and his smile became permanent. He suddenly found all of his thoughts and ideas worthy of giggling fits, in awe of his own mind's capabilities. He had clearly caught the bug of pure green power enlightenment. "I get why you guys do this all the time now," he said exuberantly. We were happy to see him so elated, as he clearly enjoyed himself with the grace of the green power, and we were a bit envious of the sheer effect he experienced that our tolerances didn't afford us anymore. That being said, he started to come across as a little too far gone in the great unknown, and we grew worried about just how far he'd gone. What if he wasn't able to keep it together in front of his parents later? It was a justified concern. Master Daniel told us to watch as he cleared a path through the tall grasses for us, and we watched as he stampeded the grasses down in one full running charge, not unlike a rhinoceros. In our green power cheer, the three of us looked at each other in comic amazement. Despite our worries about blowing our cover to his parents, Fenril kept it together and deemed his first trial a success. He was anxious to consume more green power and to spread the word of its greatness. The next time we went out into the woods after school, his epiphanies ran amok once again. He started to rap in his own white, boy from the northern woods way, inspired by his new interest in Kid Cudi. "It's the state of God from the state of God. It's the state of God from the state of fields and forests." He explained that this mindset was the state of God, and that the northern woods was also the state of God, not to mention the state of fields and forest. I enjoyed his little rap and thought this burst of creativity was amusing. It seemed that Fenril was blossoming into the type of green power user I could jive with. As we moved into October, Fenril decided to have a birthday bonfire at his house. He'd have all of his friends over, and their friends too, and we'd consume green power in the open air of his backyard. It was a big event for me and River to look forward to. Though we had enjoyed fires at Tetons for a couple years at that point, Fenril was about to open up the concept of friendly fires and green power to a whole new set of people. This was the typical junior year, blossoming I had come to expect for almost every class, based on what the classes above us had gone through, but I had lost hope it would ever happen. The party went down, and Fenril successfully turned on a handful of our peers to the green power, and all in one big event, like a movie about peer pressure. River and I were excited, of course, since we had wanted to share the green power vibe with friends for quite some time. But it was a bittersweet occasion. Of course it was a victory for the green power tribe, and that's all we ever wanted. But I couldn't help but feel offended by the fact that it was through Fenril's approval of the green power that it had finally gained the approval of a wider sphere. There, River and I had been, obviously in the practice of green power consumption, while we maintained our sanities and public images, but it still hadn't been enough proof for others to trust us and join the club. Then there was Fenril, whose green power-influenced persona was borderline manic and juvenile in appearance. And yet people were suddenly enthused to join him. Of course, it shouldn't matter who did what first, and it's quite silly to expect reverence for experimenting with something before others. But I felt that I at least deserved apologies for my previous vilification. I watched as people who had publicly rejected me for my green power usage only 2 years prior consumed green power for their first times. And who received all of the credit? Fenril did, for he was the arbiter of a new wave of green power enlightenment. My friend Ari, who had stopped hanging out with me because of my green power usage, tried the green power for the first time at this fire of Fenril's, and as a result we started to become friends again. I decided to look past his hypocrisy at the time. Surely the enjoyment of others and their newly found appreciation of the green power outweighed the subtle disrespect of not acknowledging me as a green power veteran. As for Fenril's crazed green power-induced states, River and I figured those would die down in caliber as his tolerance grew, as is the case for most people. One is permitted some silly, high out-of-their-mind moments with one's first green power consumptions. Unfortunately, Fenril's moments were not limited to his early consumptions, and even after an entire winter of green power usage, he still acted like a bumbling, narcissistic idiot during his green power highs. One half day of school we had, River and I went over to Fenril's and brought over my electronic beat machine to have Fenril try freestyling over some beats. Post-green power consumptions, all Fenril could do is give half-assed attempts to rhyme, all the while interrupted by nervous laughter. And more people arrived at his house that we were unaware he had invited. Fenril was less interested in forming a crew with us and preferred to be on his own high horse, to be the guy with the open house where anyone could come consume green power. He made plenty more friends than just us, and he wasn't particularly interested in collaborating creatively. He just wanted to consume green power with as many people as possible and to enjoy the fantasy that he would one day become a rapper like Kid Cudi or Wiz Khalifa. I only say fantasy because his rapping prowess was nowhere close to what it could have been, but he was completely unaware of that fact. I felt like we were starting to lose him, if we ever truly had him, and the more he continued to consume and consume, the less River and I wanted to hang with him. I will return to the timeline of the fall of junior year, but first, I want to put Fenril's story to rest. I would never wish what happened to Fenril on anyone, and I wish that he had more of a role in the rest of my story. As junior and senior year progressed, Fenril opted for the I don't give a fuck attitude that a green power user with no discipline often possesses. He started to disrespect his parents and would lock himself in his room to consume green power until he could no longer feel the effects. He even became ambivalent about school, as he would frivolously give lip to our teachers and thought it was cool to not do homework. I didn't understand what was happening. Had River and I not set a good example? We hadn't fallen into the tired, harmful stereotypes of green power users who become rebellious punks with no self-awareness. Yet there was Fenril, who had all but completely ignored our examples and forgot where his green power story had started. He instead flipped the bird to the world and threw away all that was ever good to him. It's hard to say who gave up on whom, but River and I wanted no part in Fenril's new attitude and stopped hanging out with him altogether. He was going down a path that I couldn't follow, as he'd also be able to quote from Star Wars Episode 3. Fenril became the very thing that he may or may not have vowed to destroy. It was hard to not feel culpable. Who knows how long it would have taken him to get to the green power had it not been for us. Though that may be the case, one can reason that he would have arrived there eventually, one way or another, and a similar thing probably would have happened. That's no comfort to his mother, however, who saw her son start to change once he started to spend time with us, and never saw him go back to his original state. I told my mother to relay to her that it wasn't our fault, because we hadn't set these examples aside from the consumption itself, and we had no way of knowing that Fenril would go full manic depressive with the green power. It still remains a sad story, as I haven't had correspondence with Fenril ever since high school, and he decided to not go to uni. Instead, he opted to work at a gas station and smoke cigarettes on the reg. Let this be a cautionary tale that the effects of green power are different for everyone, and it was in my poor judgment to assume that the power was perfectly benign regardless of the user. I suppose that the lazy green power dropout stereotype exists for a reason,